Okay, we're going to start tonight's class. You have the link in the chat if you want to look at anything that I'm discussing of the Tanya. I strongly encourage, and I'm going to continue to encourage people to take a browse of the chapter that we're discussing so that when I'm giving the class like tonight, you're already somewhat familiar with the chapter that we're going to be studying about. Okay. Because this is going to be a little bit more of an in-depth class. This is not the ABCs. We've already been together for already some time. So when I give a class like tonight, I'm going to not assume that you know the chapter well, but I'd like to assume that you at least read the chapter. So I'm not trying to give you homework. We're not in a city college over here. No one's getting credits. But in order for us to cover ground in each class and to be able to somewhat cover a chapter per class, at the very least, if you guys can look at that link that's in the chat or the link that's in your emails. And if Silva, if you can mute everybody else besides me. And this way we'll get a little bit of a head start every time we start these classes. So next class, hopefully we'll do chapter 2. Hopefully you guys will have read somewhat chapter 2 already. So that's kind of the idea. Okay. So a bit of an introduction before we jump into chapter 1. And again, you can look on your screen at chapter 1 as I'm kind of going through the class. I'm going to be going through the chapter, but you guys can be going along in the English side, or you can just listen to me, and that's totally fine too. We're not going to be doing it inside, at least for now. So the introduction to the Tanya, this is my personal introduction, and that is that Shner Zalman of Liadi, he's the author of this book. There's 53 chapters in this book. This is a compilation of different teachings of the Rebbe, of Shner Zalman of Liadi. He's called Shnei Or Zalman of Liadi. Liadi, it's a town which I actually visited the graveside of this rabbi, of this author, Shnei Zalman. Shneir means two lights. Shnei is two, Echad, Shnayim is two, Or is light, Shnei Or. He's a two-pronged luminescent rabbi who not only taught the masses the Hasidic, esoteric, Kabbalistic teachings like this book called the Tanya, but he also, the other light was the code of Jewish law, basic Torah, basic law for us to understand and how to practice and be Jewish. And that's called the Shulchan Aruch, which he authored as well. We're going now back roughly 250 years. Okay, the book is called Tanya for really one reason, because that's the first word, the first Hebrew word of the book is called Tanya. We learned, so the Rebbe begins the chapter with, we learned. He always likes to not give credit to himself, the Rebbe. So he says, we learned, we saw in this book, and he put together and navigated hundreds of books and hundreds of texts, which is what we call the Tanya. And that's why the book is called Tanya, not the woman, the ice skater Tanya, but Tanya. So that's what we have over here. Okay. There was naturally a lot of opposition to this book. And I'll let you tell me what some of that opposition was after we read a chapter or two of this book called Tanya. I'll let you kind of come up with, in your opinion, why you think there was some opposition. And I won't present it now. We'll let you think about that as we kind of get through things. Okay. The Tanya begins in chapter 1 with a quote from the Talmud, from Tractate Nida. And this is a very powerful quote from the Talmud. And it states that before the soul comes down to planet Earth, it is obligated to make a vow. And it's a double vow. The vow imposed on the soul is, when I, Mendel Schwartz, come down to planet Earth, enclosed in this physical body, I swear to you, God Almighty, I will be a tzaddik. I promise to be a righteous person. And Bara says, I'm going to be a female righteous woman. and I will be good, and I will honor my parents, and I will do good, and only do mitzvot. That's what the soul promises. And it further makes a vow and states, and I will not be a Rasha. I will not be a wicked person. So it's a double-headed vow. I swear I will be a tzaddik, and I swear I will not be a wicked person. It continues, and even if the whole world thinks, I am a tzaddik, I should consider myself a wicked person. So don't be too haughty on myself after I'm being good and I go to synagogue and I ate the matzah on the Passover and I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing and I'm being a tzaddik. I'm fulfilling my commitment, my vow of being a tzaddik. But even if someone's a Melo Schwartz, you're God's gift to mankind. I should view myself as being a wicked person. This is a quote not from the Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, but the author of the Tanya is extrapolating this quote from the Talmud, from Tractate Nida, as I said before. Now, the Rebbe has a question. But if I always view myself as a wicked person, then I will become a depressed soul. Can you imagine if every day I'm doing good, I get an A on my report card, and my father says, you're a lousy child? Can you imagine if I'm married to Mark Gale, and I'm always taking out the garbage, and I'm always doing good, I'm always doing the dishes, I'm being a tzaddik, I'm praying, and every day Mark tells me I'm a good for nothing. It's not healthy. I will not be happy with myself. It's not a healthy marriage. So make up your mind. In other words, I'm supposed to do good, and I'm being a tzaddik, I'm doing good, yet I'm supposed to view myself as being a wicked person. On the other hand, if I view myself as a wicked person, I'm going to become a depressed soul. They're going to send me back to rehab. So how am I supposed to act? What is a healthy individual supposed to do with him or herself? So this is a very flamboyant, full-on opening to this book called the Tanya. So it's all a soul discussion. Before the soul comes onto planet Earth, it has to swear, I'm going to be a tzaddik, I will not be a Rasha. And even if everyone says I'm a tzaddik, I should view myself as a Rasha, a wicked person. On the other hand, we know from other places in Judaism, in scripture, if I always view myself as a wicked person, I will become a depressed soul. And God, when God is always telling us we should be happy. We know we should be happy. Don't worry, be happy. At any time, anybody, if you have a question, unmute yourself and you feel free to ask it. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, as a result of this mishmash of these swears and these double swears, and furthermore, why do I have to swear that I'm not going to be a tzaddik? I already said I'm going to be I'm not going to be a Rasha, a wicked person. I already committed to being a tzaddik. Why do I have to make a double swear? I'm not going to be a Rasha. Once I already committed to being a righteous, a good person, so automatically we know that I'm not going to be a bad person. Yet God is telling me, the soul, before I come down to planet Earth, I have to make this double swear. I'm going to be a tzaddik, a righteous person, and I'm not going to be a wicked person. So there seems to be a bit of a confusion with some of these scriptures that the author of the Tanya is sort of presenting to us. So what the author now does at the very beginning, before he even jumps into all the other chapters about what it means to be a tzaddik and everything else, is he, like a surgeon, this is a very good piece of work that he's doing. Like a surgeon, he tells us there are 5 categories. And let's understand these 5 categories with the human psyche. Category number 1 is there's something called a tzaddik, first of all. There's something called a righteous man, a righteous woman. And when we say a righteous person, we mean a righteous person who's always doing good. There's another category there's a righteous person, but there's some bad in there. There's a bit of spiritual schmutz. And I'm talking about a male or a female. This is a non-binary class over here. There is something called a wicked person. When I say wicked, I mean completely wicked. That's the third category. The fourth category is a wicked person that has some good. In Hebrew, it's called a Rasha V'tovlo. And then there's the fifth category, which is the focus of this book, which is the Benoni, which is the intermediate individual. So again, the author of the Tanya tells us, and he presents to us, not from his invention, but based on different teachings of the Talmud, that there are 5 categories. There is a righteous person who's always good, who's completely righteous. There's a righteous person who is mostly good, but there is some bad in there, and we'll discuss that. And then there is the third category, which is a wicked person who's a complete wicked person. There's the fourth category who's a wicked person, but he has some good. And then there's an intermediate individual, which is the Benoni. He's a little bit here, a little bit there. He's smack dab in the middle. And one of the names of this book, besides it being called Tanya, is called the book for the Benoni, the book for the intermediate individual. And the reason why the author calls his book the book for the intermediate individual is because the Benoni in Hebrew, the Benoni, is a level that every one of us can attain. To be a complete tzaddik, it's a little hard to be a Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's hard to be a Mother Teresa. To be a wicked person like a Haman, I can understand when I say I'm not going to be a wicked person. The author of the Tanya is at least asking us to be the Benoni. Now we understand the first category, which is a complete tzaddik. He's a person that always does good. We understand that person that's always a sinner, like a Haman. He's a wicked person full through and through. But the second and these other categories, a tzaddik, but he does sometimes bad. So then why are we calling him a tzaddik? Why should we call her a tzaddik, a Mother Teresa that sins once in a while? Then don't call her Mother Teresa. And what does it mean when we say there's a tzaddik, there's a Rasha, there's a wicked person, but he has some good? Then don't call him a Rasha if he has some good. Don't call him a wicked person if he has some good. What are these third and fourth categories where we say he's a tzaddik or she's a tzaddik, but there's some bad in there? What does that mean? Decide. It's like I'm on a diet, but every other day I cheat. Well, then I'm not really on a diet. Or I'm a wicked person, but every other day I'm a good person. So we have to dissect that, and we're going to dissect that a little bit later. So we're going to dissect these categories of the tzaddik who has some bad or the wicked person that has some good. We're going to dissect that a little bit later in quite some weeks to come. But now we're focused on the Benoni, the intermediate individual. Shira good. I don't want you to fall asleep on me yet. The intermediate Benoni is the middle, down the road, middle person. So chapter 1 continues with now trying to dissect what does it mean, this Benoni, this intermediate individual. Now again, the Talmud mentions this idea. Be a Benoni, be an intermediate individual. But what does that mean? The Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, is a bit confused with this. Because decide, when Mendel Schwartz is studying Torah, when Bara right now is studying Torah with Mendel Schwartz on a Zoom class, right now Bara is a tzaddik. Right now you're a righteous person. There's not 1% of any evil inside of you, because right now you're doing a mitzvah. Or if you're baking challah or you're working in Olivia's kitchen, you're 100% a tzaddik, Mark, when you're doing these mitzvahs. And when you're doing a sin, God forbid, if you're sinning, so at that moment you're a wicked person. You're a sinner, you're a wicked person. So what is this term that we call a Benoni? You're a down the middle road kind of person. That doesn't make any sense. I'm saying I'm somewhat pregnant. It doesn't work. I'm generally on a diet. So I'm on a diet? Yeah, I'm generally on a diet. So what does it mean? We understand that tzaddik. We understand the righteous person, a person that's always doing mitzvot. We understand that Rasha, you're always doing, you're always being a wicked person. But we said there's this fifth category called a Benoni, which is the intermediate individual. But what does that mean? When I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm a tzaddik. When I go to synagogue on high holidays, I'm a tzaddik. When I'm honoring my parents, I'm a tzaddik. When I'm going to school, I'm a Torah class, I'm a tzaddik. And if an hour later I'm sinning, so then at that moment, I'm a sinner, I'm a rasha. So when on earth can Mendel Schwartz ever be called a Benoni? So the Rebbe, this is a very strong question that the author of the Tanya starts with chapter 1. Because again, like a surgeon, I'm telling you, he is dissecting our soul and these categories, what people took for granted for thousands of years. Again, this book was only around 250 years ago. So prior to that, Jews around the world are always quoting the Talmud, studying the Talmud. It mentions a tzaddik, it mentions a rasha, mentions a Benoni. And the author of the Tanya says, hold on, halt. What is this category called the Benoni? What does it mean you're down the middle of the road kind of person? When I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm a tzaddik. And when I'm sinning, I'm a rasha, I'm a wicked person. So this is a very strong question that he asked. Another point of tension that the Rebbe brings in chapter 1 is, if you can look, if you want to, like halfway in your chapter on the link that you had over there. It said that God that Job, stated that you, God, created tzaddikim and rishayim. You, God, created wicked people and tzaddikim and righteous people. And the Rebbe asks on this book of Job, which is one of the most important Holy Scripture books of our Bible, and he says, how can Job make such a statement that God, you created tzaddikim, you created wicked people? This goes smack in the face of free choice. God, you may have designated my soulmate. God, you may have created Mendel Schwartz and decided if I'm going to be a wealthy man or a poor man. God, you may have decided and predestined my life that I should live on Highland Avenue thousands of years ago. You already decided that. The one thing God did not decide for Mendel Schwartz is if I want to be a righteous person today or if I want to be a wicked person today. God did not decide for me if I want to go to synagogue today or if I don't. God did not decide for me if I want to be nice to my wife today or not nice to my wife. This is free choice. For me to be a mensch or for me not to be a mensch, this is free choice. So how did Job say, God, you created tzaddikim and you created wicked people. You created righteous people. That's the one thing God did not create. God may have created a Mendel Schwartz and planted him in Los Angeles. God may have created a Mendel Schwartz with a soulmate Esther Schwartz. But what God did not plant and create is if Mendel Schwartz to be a good husband or not, a righteous person or not. This God did not do. So how did Job say, God, you created tzaddikim, you created rishayim? That's another question that the Rebbe is bringing in his essay today in chapter 1, in this dissecting this genetic biology of the soul, with trying to understand what is a tzaddik and what is a rasha, what is a righteous person, what is a wicked person. And of course, we're just making everything over here a bit confusing, but I'm bringing in a lot of questions, but this is all to soon unwrap and unravel as the chapters continue to go. Andre, you had a question? No, I'm sorry, my hand was over your box. Okay. Now, some people want to answer that the Benoni, again, which is going to be the thrust and the theme of this book called the Tanya, that the Benoni is a person that sins, but he doesn't sin on biblical commandments. A biblical commandment, for example, is like eating matzah on Passover or listening to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Those are what we call biblical commandments. But if you don't pray, prayer is more rabbinical. Wearing the kippah is rabbinical. Lighting Shabbat candles is rabbinical. So some people want to say a Benoni is a person that slipped up on the rabbinical commandments. But the Rebbe argues and says that can't be the case, because even if you slip up on a rabbinical commandment, for that moment, you're a sinner. Again, we're not talking about a Jew that doesn't know about a kippah. We're talking about if Mendel Schwartz decides that, today is Tuesday, and you know what, no kippah for me on Tuesdays. Even though it's a rabbinical commandment, I can't be called a Beinoni. I'm a wicked person every Tuesday if I'm not wearing the kippah. So we're back to our original question: what on earth is a Beinoni, an intermediate kind of guy or an intermediate kind of woman? Which again, this book is called Sefer Shel Beinim, the book for Beinonis. So we definitely are going to want to understand what is the definition of a Beinoni Jew. Any questions before I move on? No, no problem. Now, there was a great rabbi, and his name was Rabbah. Give me a second. His name was Rabbah. And he said, when he was teaching his class these subject matters, he said, as an example, I'm a Beinoni. Now, this Rabbah, think of him like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was a guy that always did good deeds. And he says on himself, as an example, I'm an intermediate, I'm a middle of the road kind of guy. I'm a Beinoni. So the author of the Tanya says, how can Rabbah, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of that generation, say he's a Beinoni? A Beinoni is someone that you just said is an intermediate kind of guy. And we know Rabbah, this rabbi, never sinned. He never sinned, that he was studying day and night. So how can he say on himself that he's a Beinoni? So the author of the Tanya thus concludes that a Beinoni is somebody that indeed never sins. The intermediate level that we're talking about is a person that never sins. Because again, if he sinned even once or twice, or she sinned every Friday by saying, I'm going to be a 99% Jew. Besides, every Friday night, I don't like lighting the Shabbat counts. I'm not doing it. So that person can't be a Beinoni, because Rabbah, the great Rabbah of his generation, said, I'm a Beinoni. And we just explained a person who sins, for that moment, they're a sinner. That means every Friday night, they're going to be a sinner. Or if every Tuesday I eat a cheeseburger, I'm going to be a sinner. A Russia, every Tuesday when I do the cheeseburger. So a Beinoni, thus, is somebody that never sins. This is the conclusion of his thesis. Again, the Beinoni is not a person that does 50% mitzvot and 50% sins. Because that means when a person sins, we should call that person a Russia, a wicked person. So in conclusion, a Beinoni is somebody that never sins. And that's why Rabbah, the great rabbi of his generation, said, as an example, I'm a Beinoni. Now, it was still a mistake. He should have called himself a tzaddik. And we're going to explain why he made the mistake by only calling himself a Beinoni. But in any event, our conclusion stands, and that is a Beinoni is somebody that never sins. And that's why Rabbah made the mistake by saying on himself he's a Beinoni, because he's a person that never sinned. Why isn't he called a tzaddik? Why didn't he call himself a tzaddik? We'll discuss that mistake on his part a little bit later. Okay, so before we move on to the last part of chapter 1, let's just do in summation a conclusion. The beginning of chapter 1 discusses the soul makes a swear, a commitment that I'm going to be a tzaddik, I'm going to be a righteous person my whole life, and I'm not going to be a sinner. That's a double-sided vow. We have a question: why does the soul need to make a double-sided vow? Once the soul states, I promise my whole life to be a tzaddik, in definition, it means that that person is not going to be a wicked person. So why does that soul need to enunciate the second part of the vow by stating, and I'm not going to be a wicked person? That's point 1. The other part of the vow, which is, and if everyone thinks I'm going to be a tzaddik because I'm doing so good, we say that you should consider yourself like a wicked person so you don't become so haughty. But if I consider myself a wicked person and as if I'm trying to be humble, then if I think of myself every day as a wicked person, I'm going to become a depressed individual. And we know that I'm supposed to be happy when I serve God. I'm supposed to serve God with joy. So on the second part, we have a bit of some confusion over here. Decide, should I view myself as a wicked person or should I view myself as a righteous person? Then we went into the 5 categories. A tzaddik who is a complete tzaddik, a tzaddik who does some bad, a wicked person who's completely wicked, a wicked person that has some good, and the Beinoni. We have some confusion with these categories because what does it mean to have a tzaddik who does sometimes bad? We would never call a Mother Teresa if she sinned 1 day a week. So what does it mean, that category of a tzaddik, but a tzaddik that sometimes does bad? And like I said, we're going to explain that way later in chapter 13. On the flip side, we have a wicked person who's always wicked, that I understand. That's a person who always sins. But then we have a category called a wicked person that sometimes has good. So we're going to discuss that as well in chapter 6, chapter 7. And then we have the Beinoni, which is the hero of our book. The book is for the Beinoni. And we say she's the middle of the road kind of person. And of course, the author of Tanya is very confused with this definition of a Beinoni. What is a Beinoni? We can't say a Beinoni sometimes sins, because when that Beinoni individual is sinning, we should call her a wicked person. We should call him a wicked person. And when the person is doing good, we should say that person is a tzaddik. So what does it mean, a Beinoni? So we concluded that a Beinoni is somebody that indeed never sins. Like Rabbah, that great rabbi in his generation, said, I'm a Beinoni. I'm someone that's a Beinoni. Why did he call himself a Beinoni, not a tzaddik? That was his mistake. He was very humble. He called himself a Beinoni. But one thing is clear, a Beinoni is somebody that doesn't sin. Because if a Beinoni is somebody that sinned, Rabbah, the great rabbi, would never say, I'm a Beinoni, I'm a sinner. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe wouldn't say, I'm a good guy, but I'm a sinner. The Rebbe would not say that on himself. And the Rebbe said, I'm a Beinoni, not our Rebbe, Rabbah, the great rabbi from the times of the Talmud. So a Beinoni is somebody that does not sin. So what we're left with is, what is the difference between a Beinoni and a tzaddik? Why would Rabbah call himself a Beinoni? If a Beinoni is somebody that never sins, then just call yourself a tzaddik. So we haven't quite articulated what is a Beinoni. All we know is a Beinoni is a person that never sins. And the proof is because if the person sinned, we have to call that person a rasha, wicked person. So a Beinoni, again, is somebody that never sins, like Rabbah, like the great rabbi. What's the difference between a Beinoni and a tzaddik, between an intermediate individual and a tzaddik? We're going to discuss. But all we concluded so far in chapter 1 is a Beinoni is somebody that never sins. Okay. The other thing we mentioned, like in parentheses, is we had this issue with Job that said, God, you created tzaddikim and rishaim, wicked people and righteous people. And the author of Tanya says, hold on a minute. That's the one thing you did not create, because free choice was given to the human species. You may have created Mendel Schwartz that he's going to be a person with a black beard. You may have decided from the beginning of time, Mendel Schwartz doesn't have a black beard, with a little white when he hits 46 years old. You may have decided who my soulmate's going to be. You may have decided how many children I'm going to be. You may have decided if I'm going to live in a blue house or in a green house. But one thing you did not decide is if I'm going to be a good person or a bad person, because that is free choice. So why did Job say, God Almighty, amazing person you are. You created righteous people and wicked people, when that's the one thing he did not. Okay. We have a few minutes left. We studied already a lot about these 5 categories. So try to hold on to your brain cells, because I'm going to go through the last part of chapter 1, which is important, but it's a lot of information. So let's do this. We have 2 souls. Every human has 2 souls, the divine soul and the natural soul. The divine soul, the godly soul, will be discussed in next chapter, chapter 2. Right now, we are going to discuss the first soul, which is not the divine soul, We get our divine soul, really, it's more developed at our bar and bat mitzvah, but our animalistic soul or our natural soul, the soul that makes us tick, the soul that makes us have drive and passion, that soul we call the nefesh habahamis, which is the animal soul. That's the first soul, and that's what we're discussing now at the end of chapter 1. The nefesh elokis, the divine soul, will be discussed in chapter 2. Why do we call it the animal soul? Sounds a bit harsh. I'm sure in college they wouldn't associate us. Well, maybe in college they do actually. They say that humans are just like another form of animals. But in any case, why did the Kabbalists call our natural first soul the animal soul? Because an animal is not intrinsically bad. A cow is not bad. Even a fox is not more, or a snake is not more bad than a sheep. A fox or a snake, its animalistic instinct and tendencies is to bite or to snap at somebody, or a lion to roar at somebody. And a sheep's tendency is to be more calm and be more reserved, let's say. So every human also has its instincts and its tendencies. And we call that first soul in the human the animal soul. Now, this animal soul, where does it reside? Physically, where does this spiritual animal soul reside in Mendel Schwartz, in you? It resides in your blood. Just like the blood in you makes you live. Without your blood, you cannot function. You need to have the blood, and the blood is living and is going through your entire body and sustaining you to make you be who you are. So to the animal soul, which is my tendencies and my vitalities and my instincts and my passions and my fantasies, we say it resides in the bloodstream of the human being. And from there comes all the 4 elements that are not so healthy. So the unhealthy tendencies come from the animal soul. Now let's discuss these unhealthy tendencies. They are anger, ego, and they come from the element of fire. So again, anger and ego in the teachings of Kabbalah comes from the element of fire. Next, when I lust and I have desires for things that are not healthy, whether I'm lusting for food or lusting for other people's property, spouses, cars, things like that, we say this comes from the element of water, because water makes everything grow, like the whole vegetation system. So when I am lusting after physical things, we say it's coming from the element of water in me. Next, so that's your second category of bad tendencies. The first was anger and ego. The second one was lusting for pleasure. That was your second tendencies of things that are not healthy. Your third category of unhealthy tendencies is being lazy or just being blabbering the whole day, things with no substance. And that's why they put depression in that category. And that comes, or idle talk or gossiping. And that all is a third category of unhealthy tendencies, which the Kabbalists put from the element of wind. So we have fire, water, wind, and the fourth category of unhealthy tendencies is laziness. I'm sorry, this depression was in the fourth category with laziness, and that comes from the element of dirt. So we have the world, the physical matter comprises of one or of all 4 elements, and they are fire, water, wind as an oxygen, and dirt. Fire, by the way, also has, right? It has oxygen in it. So you have also a combination, but the 4 intrinsically pillars of the elements are fire, water, dirt, and wind or oxygen. Happens to be that the four cities in Israel, the four holy cities, correspond to these four elements. Jerusalem, we associate it with fire, because that's where the Beit HaMikdash was, and that's where the sacrifices were. Hebron, we associate with the elements of dirt and dust. It's a burial place, Hebron. Tiberias is another holy city, which we associate with water, with the banyas and the springs and everything else. And the other holy city of Tzfat, we associate with the element of wind, ruach, and that's in high altitude. But those are the four holy sides of those four elements. The Tanya, since we're still discussing the first soul and its four categories of unhealthy tendencies, they also come from the four elements. So again, just to recap, the first category of anger and ego comes from fire. Desiring, lusting over unhealthy things comes from the category of water. Idle talk, making fun of, gossiping comes from the category of wind, like using your mouth and oxygen. And the fourth category, unhealthy category of being lazy and being depressed comes from the element of dirt. That's your fourth unhealthy side elements of dirt. And all this is coming from the first animal soul, which gives root and gives fire, which gives vitality and gives energy to these very unhealthy tendencies. And when I'm using those unhealthy tendencies and I'm going after those unhealthy desires or lusts or being depressed or being lazy and things like that, it's because I'm exercising and using my animal soul, and the animal soul is getting the better of me. Chapter 2 will discuss how to get control over things and use the other soul called the divine soul, because it also has its four healthy elements and its healthy categories. So we will stop the class there. And that is, in a nutshell, chapter 1. Of course, we went through a lot in this one chapter. And I will post this class online as well on YouTube eventually, so you can always look back at it. Any questions? Sure. What is your question, Alan? Go ahead.
I missed the first part, unfortunately, but when I picked up, you were talking this last part about different elements, earth, wind, and fire, and so forth. I don't understand how they impact our soul. I don't understand how that really ties in. I'm not in a real. I don't understand the connection.
Okay, fair enough. So first of all, it's not impacting our soul. Our soul, think of it as the battery, which is just giving energy, giving life. Okay. So like I said, the animals also have this animal soul. So a snake that wants to crawl on its belly, yeah, or a lion that wants to roar, is using its animal soul. We'll call it a battery. So in science, we have a heart. And the heart makes the blood move and makes the person or the animal live. But why does one animal roar more often than another lion? Why does this snake have a different personality? Or let's just go back to humans. Why does this human have a different personality than the other human? So it's this animal soul that is enclosed in you and enclosed in me, which is pushing you to lust more than me.
I understand that part. I don't understand how the earth, wind, and fire, though, gets into that. Like you said, wind represents what, for example? What was the wind connected to?
The wind was the idle talk.
Okay, so how does it just represent idle talk, or is it represent?
It's not a god. There is, this is where Kabbalists sometimes run into trouble, because when you put too much power and force into an element called fire, an element called wind. So that's how we have in Kathmandu, Nepal, all these different gods.
So then how does
Um,
wind connect to idle talk? I don't understand the connection of wind and idle talk.
I think this just means, first of all, it's a very good question, Alan. Thanks for raising it. I think this just means that just like we say in physical matter, everything must come from one of the four physical elements, which is Eish, Maim, Ruach, and Afar.
Right.
So too in tendencies as well, or the human character behavior. And when we say behavior, we don't just mean physical character behaviors, when a person does good or doesn't do good, but even the character behavior that no one even sees. Like no one knows if I'm lusting after a cheeseburger. Even on Yom Kippur, you won't know that.
Yeah.
But even those hidden tendencies also are going to be coming from one of the four elements.
So then this might be a ridiculous
I don't know why. I don't know. The truth is, I don't know why it's important for us to know that. Like, who cares if it comes from one of the tendencies, one of those four or not? But I just think this is just more simply of just more of a scientific study.
I mean,
like,
okay, so could we say? I mean, I don't know if this is where you're headed or not, but a person who lives in people who live in windy areas, are they more? Do they have more of a proclivity towards idle talk? Is that what you would say? That if they live in a windy area, that they're going to have that desire more, or is that not really at all?
I
That's
don't
not
think
really
so.
it.
I don't see that. No.
Okay, I don't see that either. I'm just wanting to be clear. I don't see that either.
No. I just think that I just think that everything comes from your animal soul.
Right. Okay.
And the animal soul is, I guess, maybe either being affected by one of those four elements or the reverse. Right. The characteristics or those tendencies are going to be coming from one of those four. Okay. I think why it's important for the Rebbe to mention this as I'm speaking to you is because when a person is has a lot of anger and ego, which we said comes from the element of fire, maybe when a person needs to get in check and control some of his anger. So today the doctors automatically will give you certain pills to control your anger. Mm-hmm. But if we can understand the human nature as to why is Menlo Schwartz becoming angry so often and more often than other normal people,
it comes from something burning
and inside. It comes from something, and it comes from an element of fire, then perhaps I can get a little bit more in check and do a bit homework on myself.
I think that's a good answer. That I see now. I do. That was a good answer. Thanks. By the way, I didn't think you meant that wind meant idle chatter. I didn't think that, but I just used that as an example to
Right.
I think that last answer hit it for me. Thank you. By the way, if I go online to get the class, do I just go on YouTube or where do I go to get it?
In the upcoming email, I always will post, or I try to post the last class.
Thank you.
And now, thanks for any other questions before I adjourn here.
Well, I had a quick question, this is Sylvia. So sure, maybe it's for next week, but they, on Shabbat, we have an extra soul. Is that the divine soul that we'll be talking about next week?
Yes. So the divine soul is not that extra soul that we're talking about for Shabbat. That is what we have the whole week, that extra second soul. The Kabbalists tell us, in addition to the second soul, we have what we call a third soul. But I'm not sure that we call it a third soul. I think more, I'd like to view it as we get an injection in the second soul, because the second soul is already a divine soul. I don't think that we actually get a third soul. I think it's more, when we say we get an extra soul, I think we get a booster, is the way I view it.
Perfect, considering all the boosters they want us to take these days.
And one of the reasons why we have the Pesumim, we smell the spices on Saturday night, is because we lost that booster, or we lost that extra soul. Some people say it's like you're saying an extra soul, but I don't quite understand. It's someone that studied the Tanya like myself. I don't quite understand if there's a third soul out there. The way I understand it is that you get an extra piece of energy, an extra divine nitro, what we'll call it.
Thank you.
Okay.